welcome to my YouTube channel, guys. Today we'll be focusing, or rather, as you've seen the title, today we'll be discussing, or rather, looking into my experience as to when I was waiting for my matric results. I know that this is a very difficult moment for all the matriculants, and as much as we know how difficult, or rather challenging, matric can actually be, I've always rather wanted to share this experience and to somewhat put you on ease as to how to actually handle the situation, and actually give you a sense of reference to how I actually dealt with the pain, rather, not necessarily the pain, but rather the stress and the emotions that come with waiting for such a very important lift in your life, that is moving from high school, potentially going to university, or rather even going into work or what so forth. So I'm going to look into the first point. I just broke it into 5 points so that it becomes more efficient and easier to follow. I'm just going to give a sense of how it actually started, and I know most of you can actually relate to how things were moving so fast with regards to all the assessments, with regards to the amount of work you actually have to cover in relation to ensuring that you're up to date, in relation to ensuring that you actually get the grades that are more or less sufficient, rather, in terms of getting you into varsity, as most of you, I know that you are looking forward to actually getting the best or the highest grades, rather, that will actually ensure that you somewhat are able to go to varsity. So how it started, so I'm going to look into how it started. Obviously, we know that we just came from a pandemic, rather, that is COVID-19, which obviously most of us know that it had a lot of repercussions. So obviously we know that it actually put a lot of strain, rather, on the education sector. That is, we had to somewhat not go to classes on certain days or whatnot. So obviously we know that the grade 11 as its own is more or less important for as a foundation, rather, for grade 12. So obviously I did my grade 11 in 2020. And I did my grade 12 in 2021, which was then supplemented, obviously, by the grade 11 education. But unfortunately, because we know that in 2020, a lot of stuff was happening, that is, COVID-19 was more or less on its peak, and that meant now we had to actually take rotational learning. You obviously know that some days we had to go to school, of which this led now to us not being able to actually cover the entire curriculum. And with that, it meant that now when we went into grade 12, we would have now to actually catch up, because obviously the standards that are in line in terms of being accepted into a program, that is, either you want to go to medicine, you want to go to chemistry, you want to do applied mathematics, or so forth, you need the basics, rather, that are provided by grade 12, and thus the grade 12 examinations, rather, are more or less centralized. That is, they are more or less the same, so that it's more or less the same standards that are acceptable to tertiary institutions, right? So I did my grade 12 in 2021, and that meant now we had to actually catch up, which simply meant there was a lot of load rather coming from grade 11 and obviously coming into what grade 12 is before, as much as we know that even without the amount of work that was earlier before, or rather that was not necessarily affected by COVID-19, but rather the extent and the how the curriculum itself is built. That is, now you don't really you're not babysitted, if one can say that. That is, the pace is more or less very intense, and it simply means now you have to stay on track and so forth. So that is that. So with that, it came a lot of stress from my side. From the teacher's side, obviously, in terms of ensuring that the pass rate does not go down and so forth, right? So it actually meant more studying from my side. That is, on some concepts we are not even taught. You have to actually ensure that you actually do your own form of learning. And in some subjects, rather, the teachers also were not as supplementarily useful. So that meant I had to actually read on my own and study on my own, right? So I'm giving this background to actually paint a picture as to why was I anxious in terms of waiting for the matric results. As much as you know that it's a very important time in every learner's life, or rather student life, that each and every one is looking up to you in a sense, right? So I think I've already looked into how it was. I must say that it was a very intense year. The amount of work that was there, it was really challenging, rather. I remember that there was this time now where I actually studied mathematics just the day before we were writing, and one knows that a lot of practice actually comes with mathematics, and I recall that I didn't actually pass that June, I think it was a March test, yes, a March test, and that was more or less a wake-up call for me to say you now have to change your way. That is where I started to grow rather emotionally, and that is where I started now to see that grade 12 is no child's play. And yeah, so the main objective, or rather the main things, obviously the prelims were also oh yes, just to provide a sense of the year itself. So the examination itself was more or less not the same as those that actually occurred in 2020. They also had a different sense of examination. In 2021, we also had a very slightly different approach in terms of the examination, but what is important is that the standards were still the same. So what I'm trying to say is that in 2020, they did not actually have the June exams, and obviously the not necessarily supplementary, but the preliminary exams, that is the prelims, were also not as hard, if one can say that. So with that, in 2020, because there was a shortfall in terms of the amount of work that was necessary for us to actually complete, we did not necessarily write June examinations that were centralized in a sense. That is, there were subjects rather that were compromised. That is, the subjects where we did not necessarily write June examinations that were provincial or whatnot, and that meant now that I obviously remember that in grade 11 we did not write the final examinations that were centralized. The examinations were internal, which meant we did not necessarily know the amount or rather the standard of examinations that was expected of us, and it meant that the prelims were going to be the first form of examinations rather that we had to actually face. And I must say, with the prelims, as any grade 12 learner would actually testify or verify or even confess that the prelims are no child's play. The prelims are the prelims, right? So the intention that I believe is that they are there to actually ensure that
Thank you
you
for
are
watching.
more or
Please
less
be sure to
very ready,
like,
because
subscribe,
I know
and
from
go to
all
part 2 for
the
more.
subjects
Thank you.
that were challenging for me, that is, I did pure sciences, that is, maths and sciences.